Okay, for removing an I-70 Challenger here, removing the fuel tank because I'm going with an EFI system, so I'm going into in-tank fuel system. You got to take, of course, this rubber boot off here, dust boot off, and then, of course, remove the screws out of the filler there. And really what you need to do to get the thing out is take this thing here, make sure your vent tube has been disconnected up in here. And then literally force it downward into the tank. You have to sit there and twist this back and forth until you push it down in the tank, until you can raise or get it short of the side of the car here. So push it in, and then you'll raise it up here and then pull the tube out. So that's how you're going to get it out of the car. So right now, because I'm just working on forcing it down inside there. Okay, again, working on getting the tank out. Remove the rear valance now. So of course, just for sake of not boogering them up, I took out the valance supports that mount right in here and here. So it just kind of cleans it up. It gives me a chance to get underneath here and clean it up a bit, since I had it painted and stuff too, and clean up my exhaust. And I'm actually going to yank this bumper off, I think, too, because it's one of the only things that hasn't been done yet are the bumpers, to get them into probably Utah to get them re-chromed. But yeah, so now at this point we just do the 2 J bolts. I showed you how to get the filler tube out, and the grommet kind of got boogered up a little bit, so I'm gonna have to order a new grommet. I'm surprised it rotted up as quickly as it did, but it seemed kind of cracked even. But that was a new grommet when I installed the tank, the new tank, and of course when I did all the restoration work too. So so I'm going to get a new grommet, so make sure it seals well with the new tank. So that's it there. And of course, this is the new tank, pretty much set up for the fuel injection. So again, there's your sending unit, and once you get that, they have pretty straightforward instructions of how to measure that up and get that set up for this particular tank. They're kind of a universal fit. And this here, of course, is the fuel pump, actually in tank. So there's a supply and the return, and then of course there's a vent, and the tank itself has a vent. So what I plan on doing actually is probably mounting this here somewhere like this, or like that actually, so I can take it back in the back of the car and run it, from the top of the tank off to the vent on the filler tube on the side. On a 70, there's actually a tiny little vent tube on the side of the filler tube. Of course, when it comes through, it's up right near inside the trunk, right where it connects to, well, I can't see it here, but where the fuel hole is up there, there's actually it's just right below that. So if you feel around in there before you take it out, you'll, of course, make sure you don't booger it up when you're taking out your filler tube also. One more thing on this too, as you're taking it apart here, you don't even necessarily have to get the whole thing out, because right up in here, it's a J bolt. So the bolt actually just kind of cups over like this, and there's a head on it. And I don't know if you can see it very well in there, but it actually just sets in there. So at a point where you can lift it up, get enough slack in this here, loosen this down to about here, you should be able to push the bolt up and it'll just pop out like that. Same with the other side. So you don't necessarily have to take this all the way off. So it's like I say, at a certain point you can just lift it up, pull it out of that little cup, and I'll show you again once I get it out so you can actually see the bolt if you've never done one of these before. Okay, so there's a little more light. Turn my flash on so you can see it. See, all that really does is, like I say, you can see the head of the bolt right now. You just got to finagle it out, and there it is. So it just catches up in that little bracket up there, and that's all there is to de-strap it. So probably, hopefully you got help with this. Maybe not. This is, I drained the tank because I had an electric fuel pump. I have a Holley GP110, so it was kind of handy. As you can see, the hose hanging down right there. I just put a longer piece of hose on, have my son sit in the car, put a tank down here, and just hit the pump and emptied it out into 5-gallon cans. So make sure it's empty. It can be kind of awkward to get out. As you can see, my ramps and stuff are here. I'm going to try to probably put some, rags and stuff down so I don't booger it up. I plan on selling this tank probably on eBay. Can't seem to find anybody local that's got a 70 Challenger that's looking for one. So yeah, that's it. So you just undo that bolt, and it'll drop it right down. I've already disconnected the fuel lines from it. I still do need to disconnect all of my fuel sending unit stuff though, so I just reminded myself to do that. So I'll get that disconnected before you do the last strap and take her off. Okay, here we are. It's out. Because they're pretty simple to get them out once you get the valance out. I guess I don't know that I'd try to take any shortcuts in trying to get it out, because it's, you know, it's not bad if you just do it the right way. It takes a couple extra minutes, and actually probably less time if you just take it out the right way. And there's the poly blue, as they call it now, which used to be the GP 110, 110 gallons per hour of fuel. But like I say, in tank now, high pressure for the fuel injection. So before I put anything in, put the tank back in, I'm going to get it all cleaned up, wiped up. You know, this is shock lines for air shocks on it. Don't know what I'll ever do with them necessarily, but that's it. Just going to get her cleaned up. Alright, back to it again, trying to get the fuel injection done. I went ahead and had these made. I got tired of trying to find all the funky connections to do this. At the hardware store and stuff, and I did find out from one of the part stores about a place I wasn't aware of in town that actually made these hoses up. So this is up to 300 psi, which is, you know, generally overkill. There's a place in Loveland, Colorado called Tubes and Hoses that actually made these lines for me. Again, these are flare fittings on the end, so I'm going to flare up my existing return line on here, and I'm going to flare out my 3/8 line and for the fuel injection. And of course, you put this nut on. It's a reverse flare, so you can put that up on the tube, do your flare, and then as you bring it in and screw it in there, you're going to have a lot less potentials for leaks. And like I say, in this stuff, and the fittings are rated for 300 psi, so it's probably a good investment to go ahead and get something that's not going to end up leaking on you. So I'm kind of excited about not having to do a whole bunch of funky fittings just to get that done, to get connected up to the fuel line there, which I'm going to have to put the flare on, put the nut on, then the flare, and the same with the return line. I kind of don't like the idea that I got to cut off the little flare and take some skosh of the originality away, but I have to pop that one off and do a flare. That one had been cut from a previous time. I don't know, maybe I did it a number of years ago, not sure. So all right, got most of the stuff hooked up. Of course, this is a positive for the fuel pump here. I went ahead and just let it run wild. I put a little insulator up here, of course, because this could potentially get smooshed from when it's up in place in the tank. I ran the ground wire around here, connected here to the sending unit for the fuel gauge. Went ahead and soldered these connections and used the shrink tubing on that. Like I say, and just ran these wild to the end. Of course, then once I get these figured out where I'm going to hook up, because I did have an existing Holley fuel pump back there, I already have power back there, so I'm just going to go ahead and put connections on the end. The ground, I'm going to go direct to the body and put an end on it, but I left it wild so I can get to it. And same with this, I left this wild. I'm going to go ahead and put a disconnect on here, spade bit probably, insulated for the power, so I can unplug it at the tank for removal at a future date if I need to. Because once this is up inside the car, this is going to be really difficult to get to. So make sure you get all your fittings done. I just went ahead and used the shellac on that to seal up the gas lines on this here. The only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a short piece of tubing here to connect to this. And what I'm going to do here actually is run that for my vent line, because that's your fuel tank vent. But the tank actually comes with a vent also. Instead of plugging one, I can't remember which part this came with. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and use both. I mean, it can't hurt, I'm sure. So from that point forward, I'm going to get this connected up here with some short pieces, and then of course run that up to the existing vent on the filler tube. But yeah, you need to get all this done before you try to put it in. Get it secured, get it sealed, get it connected, and that way you don't have to mess with it. The only other thing I need to do is put one more lead on this to run to the pickup for the sending unit, which is the positive terminal. Normally in the Chrysler they were on the side over here, and it was just a push-on style. So I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to do that. It won't reach to this any longer because the original one was off to the side, like I said, here. So what I'm probably going to do is just run a lead out and then somehow connect it to the existing. I may even go so far as to use one of those squish ones you just put in line. Not real fond of them, but I really have a hard time cutting off original parts. Granted, this car isn't original completely, but something I just don't want to do. So make sure you get that one done. One of the other considerations to always remember also is to use the appropriate sized wire or gauge of wire. Now, that's going to depend on the run and the length and the amperage of your fuel pump. But make sure that you talk to somebody or do the math, whatever it is, to make sure you use a proper gauge wire. Don't use too light a gauge wire because you'll have problems with fuses blowing, hot wires, things like that that are, could melt down, potential fire hazard, especially on a fuel pump because I'm pretty sure they're pretty high amperage typically. So you want enough size in that so your wires aren't going to get hot and cause you a fire. Alright, the tank's pretty well connected. Just go over a few things here. I went ahead and just made these pigtails essentially run wild for all of this in order to make sure that I had plenty of room to connect, but obviously with this being up against the bottom side of the car, it's going to be really difficult to try to do this after the fact, after it's in place. So what I've done is gone ahead and connected everything, made the pigtails run wild so I can cut them, of course, to the appropriate length when I need it. I'm replacing, of course, the intank deal here, and I used to have a Holly, so I already have a wire run to the back of the car. But what I'd suggest is, of course, I know there's a formula for this, but make sure you use a heavy enough gauge wire when wiring up your fuel pump, because I'm pretty sure they draw quite a few amps. You don't want this wire getting hot, shorting out, causing a potential fire, losing your car because of just not using an inadequate wire gauge to prevent that. On this side here, what I did, and again, here's the ground wire here, and I got the ground wire here for the sending unit. Again, on the sending unit and stuff, what I did, again, try to keep it as clean as possible. So I brought the two line over, I cleaned off a portion of the continuous line here, and then, of course, put some flux on there. I went ahead and soldered it, then slid some shrink tubing up over the top, just to keep the connections nice and clean, keep some of the dirt and debris out there. Hopefully, in a classic or whatever that you're working on, you're not going to deal with that whole bunch of dirt and debris, but still keeps the stuff out. And then the same thing here. I went ahead, granted I used some crimp connections. I didn't solder those. I did crimp them really well. I took off the plastic sheath on most of them. As you can see, I left one on there that I'm probably going to replace and fix it. And then I just rolled the shrink tubing up over the top of it and connected it. But again, this is a sending unit. Same thing here. Just ran it wild so I can make a connection. What I'm going to do is put an insulated spade bit both on here and on the positive side of the fuel pump. I'm going to, of course, so you never get them mixed up, I'm going to use an opposite. So on this side here, I'll use the flat insulated one to go inside. The female portion I'll put on the other, and I'll do it exactly opposite on this one because this isn't a power lead, so to speak. So my main concern would be on the fuel pump is to make sure that when you unplug it that it doesn't touch anything on the car side. So just doing them opposite just for the simple reason of that. And then of course here's my vent lines. These are all hooked up. Like I say, it does come with two vents. The tank has a vent. The fuel pump has a vent. I can't remember if this came with the fuel pump unit. I think it probably did. So I've got this unit here. What I'm going to do is run the vent line up to the tube that actually comes out of your filler tube. There's a vent pipe attached to that from the factory that I'm going to attach to. They also came with another vent item here, and this came with the tank, I believe, also. So this you could also mount in, and of course follow your directions. If you don't have a vent built into your line that's above the height of the filler neck, this would be the way to go. And there's instructions with that on how to install that, so make sure you read that depending on the tank that you get. But vent your tank so it doesn't build pressure and backflow. Okay, and that's another step almost done, and after this I'll get her up in place. One more final view of it. So I got her all buttoned up, got all my return line and stuff done. and all the hoses put on. I had to take this one back and lengthen it. I also went and, you know, kind of wrapped that up. I plan on mounting this up so when the straps come from under the tank, you're going to come up and cover this here. It gives a little bit of added protection there. And if you notice on each one of these, on the connections, I've got a different connection for each one. So when I hook it up, there's no chance of ever really wiring it to the wrong plug. One of the other things I'm going to make you aware of before you order your tubing is to make sure that you go ahead and get that fitting right here on, get your flare done ahead of time. What I ran into was this was longer, and of course this nut, because there was a little elbow right here, or a little bend in the pipe, I couldn't get that far enough to get a decent flare, so I ended up having to cut it back farther. So therefore, had to, you know, have them redo my hose for me, my fuel line hose. So make sure you do all your flares and your fittings ahead of time. Watch out for any bends in the pipe that may cause, you know, you to have a different measurement when you get your hose. And of course, here's the other side on the return line, so it's all done there too. So now it's time to put her in.